So today we'll be doing some individual differences psychology revision. Firstly, what is individual differences psychology? Caprara and Curver in 2000 state that individual differences psychology is the study of the structure and determinants of enduring psychological characteristics as perceived by the individual and those around them. These enduring characteristics are collections of behaviors, feelings, and thoughts that systematically typify how individuals and groups of individuals appear to be similar or different. These psychological phenomena also have consequences for how individuals react and therefore regulate themselves across a range of life domains. And the relationship between these person and situation variables is complex and reciprocal. Individual differences can therefore be defined as enduring typical characteristics or dispositions of individuals. The psychometric approach is most frequently used in a study of individual differences. It is concerned with theory and technique of psychological measurement, knowledge, ability, attitudes, and personality traits. However, many in the field, such as Caprara and Curver in 2000, argue that the focus of developing lists of traits or taxonomies is limited because it tends to focus on descriptions of the nature and structure of individual differences. Think about your own experience and how your performance on tests, personality, and intellectual ability have and will be used to assess your suitability for a job or place on a well-paid graduate training scheme. Test scores are used to make high-stake decisions about individuals. The focus of individual differences typically involves constructing taxonomies of characteristics that can apply to individuals in general, or what can be described as a nomothetic approach. The use of the term individuals is an important issue here. When researchers and writers in the field refer to the individual or how individuals differ from one another or are similar, they are often referring to research results that are essentially some form of aggregate data collected from a group or groups of individuals drawn from specific populations, and these data are then combined in some way to produce aggregate group data. So remember that an important psychometric principle relates to scaling, and this states that complex psychological phenomena can be transformed into quantities or numerical data that represent real differences in complex psychological qualities. So scaling is measuring unmeasurable constructs such as human psychological functions. So remember, the main types of measurement used in individual differences psychology are S data, O data, L data, and T data. S data is self-report data where the individuals report their own symptoms, behaviors, beliefs, attitudes, usually through questionnaires and surveys. O data is observational data, and but when the observer describes the subject's behavior. L data is life data, and it is the information about the individual's personality based on life records. Test data is T data, and it's the information by standardized tests or testing situations if different people behave differently and identical situations altering. So it's looking at differences in people under control conditions. Individual differences psychology relies heavily on self-report data. Reliability. So what is reliability? Reliability is the extent to which a measure assesses a characteristic as accurately as possible. So it's looking at the consistency of measuring characteristics. Internal consistency, or coefficient alpha, is an indicator of test quality. So internal consistency refers to whether a measure is consistent within itself, and the coefficient alpha looks at how closely items in a set are related. Therefore, for psychometric reasons, it is important that our measures assess these with as little random error or systematic error as possible. Random error is the statistical fluctuations due to precision limitations of measurements, and the systematic error is the biasing effect in environmental methods and observations and instruments used, affecting the results in the same direction. It is also important to remember that psychometric tests consist of multiple items, and your score is calculated by adding up your scores on a number of items and then sometimes calculating an average score. We call your final single score aggregate individual data. A measure can be reliable but lack validity. In other words, a measure can assess consistently the same construct, but this consistency can be observed even if the measure does not actually measure what it claims to. Thus, the validity of a measurement is central to its accuracy. Validity and types of validity. So what is validity? Validity tests is the test's ability to measure what it claims to measure. So a measure has face validity if the test taker and the test the test appears to measure the superficial appropriateness of the tests. So it looks at whether the test appears to test what it aims to test, basically. Both concurrent and predictive validity are types of criterion-oriented validation procedures, and BPS 2000 states that when a person's score on a test is used to predict or anticipate how they will perform on types of tasks not directly sampled by the test, but which have been shown to be correlated with test performance, we are engaging in a process described as criterion referencing. So, concurrent validity is questions whether the test relates to underlying theoretical constructs, and predictive validity tests whether it predicts performance on a related criterion. Criterion referencing are the questions used in a test and whether they're meant to show how much a person actually knows how the person's performance. It looks at how the person's performance compares to expectations. We usually calculate convergence and divergence using statistical tests of correlations, and if measures converge as predicted, we can say that the measurements in question have convergent validity. If measures diverge as predicted, we can say that the measurement in question has divergent validity. So convergent validity is the degree to which two measures of constructs that theoretically should be related are in fact related, and divergent validity looks at whether the test's concept of measurements that are not supposed to be related are actually unrelated. Construct of theoretical validity, which according to Corbach and Mill 1955 is a more complex concept than the other types of validity. It involves whenever a test is to be interpreted as a measure of some attribute or quality which is not operationally defined. The problem faced by the investigator is what constructs account for variance in test performance. Construct validity calls for no new scientific approach. Much current research on tests of personality is construct validity, usually without the benefit of a clear formulation of this process. Construct validity is therefore whether the test is related to generalizing, which interferences can legitimately be made from the operations in the study to the theoretical constructs to which the operations are made. Standardization and norms. So standardization refers to how a measure is administered and the transformation of test scores into standard measure or one with known characteristics. Norms are statistical information about the distribution of scores on a particular test from a known population. In this sense, norms are also test scores that have been transformed. Let's look at personality now. So there's many theories of personality, evolutionary theories, biological theories. They're looking at researchers looking at fundamental dispositions, statistical models, and the lexical hypothesis. Einzig's tripartite model of personality. tripartite model of personality, and five-factor traits and trait coherency. So there's an evolutionary theory about traits being personality being a product of natural selection of adaptive characteristics. But the controversy with this is, why are some aspects of personality observed that do not offer individuals selective advantages? There's biological theories of personality, and these are Pavlov and Einzig's, which take a biological approach, and they both argue that observable personality is underpinned by differences in how sensitive the nervous system is to environmental stimuli, and differential nervous system sensitivities can be measured by how easy it is to condition individuals, so a response increases in an environment as a result of reinforcement. Gray's theory of personality is another biological approach which conceptualizes personality as behavior shaped by two systems: behavioral activation and behavioral inhibition. And the activation system is alleged to underpin spontaneous, impulsive, and pleasure-seeking behavior. So activation is arousal, and inhibition, it blocks and suppresses behaviors. So there's also Alpert's theory, and he conceptualizes personality traits as fundamental dispositions that are independent of and not influenced by one another or by other variables. So research on individual differences that focuses on describing the discrete personality traits often concentrates on developing taxonomies that list personality traits. Trait approaches to personality often use statistical models and the lexical hypothesis to develop their theories. So the lexical hypothesis, that's when personality traits and differences that are the most important to people become part of the language. There's Einzig's model of personality, and this consists of psychoticism, extroversion, and neuroticism. And these are described as superfactors, so traits stable across time and situation. Also remember that the NEOPIR is a measure of the five-factor personality traits. Evidence suggests that we seek out contexts and activities that are coherent with our traits, and this is known as trait coherency. So, for example, low levels of trait extroversion might lead an individual to seek out quiet environments and avoid large social group gatherings. Intelligence and intelligence testing, that's what we're going to look at now. So psychologists, they aim to measure these differences in intelligence in a systematic and robust and unbiased way, but this is a very controversial topic. One of the major domains of individual differences psychology is intelligence. Cooper 2002 states that intelligence requires substantial information processing. The traditional theories about intelligence look at the structure and composition of intelligence. So they came up with, there's Lumpers theories, Splitters theories, and hierarchical theories. So Lumpers theories, that they conceptualize intelligence as a single entity, whereas Splitters theories conceptualize intelligence as being made up of different components. So Spearman's G is an example of a Lumpers theory, and he developed a range of statistical tests using correlation and factor analysis to look at the relationship between different types of ability tests. So these are general abilities. And there's splitters. So the splitters theories are Thurstone's primary mental abilities and Cattell's GF and GC. So Thurstone's primary mental abilities, he used a variety of statistical procedures which are different to Spearman and forced abilities to be orthogonal, so independent. And there's Cattell's fluid and crystallized intelligence, and he looked at aptitude versus attainment. So two he looked at crystallized intelligence and fluid intelligence as two very broad types of ability, and aptitude and attainment was versus attainment. That's what are the primarily abilities of this. So here's fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence, and as you can see from the model, fluid intelligence can become crystallized intelligence through learning, but crystallized intelligence can go back to being fluid intelligence um, with learning being degraded or stopped when someone stops learning. There's controversies in intelligence, and this refers to racial group differences in intelligence and the bell curve debate. So there's people that were quite racist about the idea of intelligence and thought that stated that um, Caucasian individuals are more intelligent than minorities, and the bell curve debate that refers to whether there's a normal distribution of intelligence and people should fit into a certain category. And there's Hunstein and Murray's 1994. He published a controversial book called The Bell Curve and Intelligence and Class in American Life. So he looked at racial and sex differences, stigma, and eugenics. Racial and sex differences referred to the differences in mental functions and behaviors of individuals from different races and genders. Stigma, so people stating that intelligence is a controversial topic and feeling shamed and disapproved by the idea of having being classified as a certain in a certain intellectual category. Eugenics is about improving the quality of human species by discouraging reproduction of individuals that were less intelligent um, because of their genetic defects. Now, there's many types of intelligent tests, and usually they look at typical and optimal performance. So, tests that examine optimal performance, they assess performance and knowledge, and individuals are asked to carry out certain activities or complete tasks, for example, numerical reasoning, present items for which there are right or wrong answers, and these tests are generally timed. They consist of speed tests and power tests. Speed test is how quickly an individual responds to items, and power test is how many items an individual can get right. So these are tests of ability, aptitude, and attainment. If we look at power tests closely, so ability is what a person can do now. So for example, diagrammatic reasoning, numerical reasoning. Aptitude is what a person has the ability to do in the future, such as typing, clerical aptitude. Attainment is like A levels and driving tests, and it's about a specific educational achievement or accomplishment. Personality and physical for health. So, personality and physical health uh, is the use of a psychometric to understand the role of personality in the onset, development, and management of physical health problems. But this can be controversial because psychometrics don't necessarily observe the physiological changes in the human body. Rather, it looks more at the mental aspect of personality. Traditionally, research on personality and physical health has focused on identifying disease-prone personalities, and an important principle of the biopsychosocial model of health is that many factors other than the purely biochemical or semantic influence health and disease. So the biopsychological or psychosocial model of health is a broad view which attributes disease outcomes to intricate, variable interactions of biological factors, physiology, and social factors. Um, Early researchers, so looking at type A personality, early researchers on type A behavior pattern argue that it is linked to cardiovascular disease, by pathogenic neurophysiological mechanisms. Also, type A individuals often display behavior styles typified by anger in, so for example, subtle behavioral expressions of anger in response to criticism, and hostility, for example, unfriendly and cold behavior. How type A behavior pattern is measured is important, and the structured interview appears to be the most valid and reliable measure. Type B personality. So, Roseman and Friedman argue that much of the behavior typical of type B personality can be described as appropriate autonomy. So, appropriate autonomy facilitates self-determination, motivation, healthy development, and optimal functioning. So it's the opposite. Type B personality is the opposite of type A personality. Type C personality is used to describe what has been referred to as the cancer-prone personality. Now, type D personality was developed to help understanding of how individuals respond to surgery, medication, and other clinical outcomes, as well as patients' help-seeking behaviors. Atypical personality. So, looking at um, the continuity debate, it is the continuity refers to the continuity in the quantity of personality traits across time. So whether personality traits are consistent across a person's life. There's ethical implications about this because sometimes if a person has a personality disorder and they are labeled with that personality disorder across their time, it could affect them socially, and there's a stigma in terms of personality disorders as well. So, Keyes 2005 Complete State Model of Health, it indicates that individuals with complete mental health should be free of mental diseases and flourishing. Hamston 2012 argues that conscientiousness, one of the big five personality factors, which looks at um, the person is characterizing the person as self-disciplined and having a drive to achieve. And this is a valuable predictor of health. That's what Hampson states. McRae, Lockenhoff, and Costa, they argue that the characteristic maladaptations are adverse consequences and problems of daily living that can develop as the individual with certain trait intensities interacts with their environment. Trait negativity and negative affectivity is measured using levels of trait neuroticism, and this is also one of the big five factor traits, and it characterizes an individual as moody, more anxious, more worry, more fear, and anger and frustration. So that can be measured using the trait negative affectivity can be measured using this trait. The dark triad traits are personality traits originally developed to describe personality, and they consist of three traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. So the dark triad traits have a dark and bright side as well. Atypical personality, looking how do we classify atypical personality in terms of personality disorders. So Tyra et al. 2015 states that nobody doubts the existence of personality, but what constitutes its disordered form is difficult to specify. So there's a debate as well about whether personality traits should be clearly defined categorical definitions or dimensional trait-based theory. There's a debate within that personality traits should be placed in distinct categories and classified as either present or absent, or whether there's a continuum on which an individual can have various levels of an atypical characteristic. So the classification tools used to assess personality disorders are the ICD-10 and the DSM-5. So they classify diseases and are based on the principles that mental disorders are qualitatively distinct from mental health. So If personality traits observed in the general population can be used to describe and diagnose personality disorders, we can infer that typical and atypical traits form continua, so various levels of a characteristic. Moving on to sex differences and cultural differences. So personality traits and social groups. It's exploring personality traits across groups using trait scores. So there's interpretations of findings such as the uniformity facility, and the uniformity facility occurs when an unobserved instance is above a flipping point. McCrae 2004 model, she suggests that there's a role in personality shaping culture, but not the other way round. And this study was based on 36 cultures across 5 continents. There's methodological approaches to exploring personality, sex, and culture. So there's the transcultural research that tests the universality of personality structures and traits and tests trait patterns. Intracultural research, it looks at culture specific expressions of personality, and intercultural research looks at cultural differences in traits and how these differences are linked to the characteristics of the cultures being studied. There are trait differences between men and women. So men are low in CEAN and women are high in CEAN. So CEAN refers to the big 5 personality traits, and that's 4 of those traits, being consciousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And these are assessed via differences in trait scores between males and females. And it turns out that males and females differ systematically. Motivation. So there's many different definitions of motivation. For example, Bumister and Vos 2007 says that motivation in essence is any sort of general drive or inclination to do something. Deci and Ryan states that it's how to move ourselves or others to act. Caprara and Curvone 2000 state that classical theories of personality primarily are theories of motivation. Alpert, in the functional anatomy of motives, argued that psychology as a discipline, and in particular personality psychology, is essentially about motivation. So motivation is any type of psychology that treats motives, thereby endeavoring to answer the question as to why man behave as they do, is called the dynamic psychology. By its very nature, it cannot be merely a descriptive psychology, content to depict the what and how of human behavior. And there's 4 types of motivation, and intrinsic and extrinsic. That looks at intrinsic motivation, looks at how performing an action or behavior because of that person enjoying the activity itself. Extrinsic motivation behavior is the drive by external rewards such as money, fame, grades, and praise. Goal orientation is moving towards a goal, and self schema is the long lasting set of memories that summarize a person's beliefs, experiences, and generalizations about the self. And this looks more at self efficiency, self competence, attribution, agency. And there's interest. So, interest in terms of motivation is the curiosity and it's a feeling we feel because we are motivated by the curiosity in ourselves or in the situation. So, individual or situational. Contemporary approaches to human motivation tend to focus on the basic concepts of the processes, and these have been described as bottom up. So, there is progression from individual elements to the whole. Another feature of contemporary approaches to human motivation is that they do not focus on listing taxonomies of different motives, unlike personality. So, Kava and Scheiser's control theory is a bottom-up process, and it's a model of behavior based on principles of negative feedback, behavior that is the control of perception. Abraham's hierarchy of needs is a top-down process. So Maslow conceptualized human motives as needs, and Maslow's hierarchy has increased the number of needs, but this does not include affective, so the affect display of facial, vocal, gestural behavior that serves as an indicator of affect. The control theory, on the other hand, uses a cybernetic metaphor to conceptualize human motivation, and this cybernetic metaphor looks at concepts which are abstract from the context of the specific organism. Although control theory has been criticized, it cannot be accused of using a top-down approach because it does consider motivation as a bottom-up process.